All right, everyone, settle in. Today, we're going to be field archaeologists. We're digging way past the Hollywood myths, past all the speculation, to get at one of history's biggest questions. Who really built the pyramids? I want you to forget everything you think you know. We're just going to follow the evidence. I mean, just look at them. For 4,500 years, these things have just dominated the horizon. They feel almost impossible, right? These are monuments from a civilization that basically vanished, and they managed to move 6.5 million tons of stone with pretty much just wood, rope, and sheer human ingenuity. And that's always been the core mystery. I mean, who could possibly organize that many people for a project this gigantic? What kind of society has the resources and the will to build something designed to last for all eternity? Now, we all know the story that usually gets told. It's the one we've all seen in the movies, thanks to big Hollywood epics like the Ten Commandments. You can picture it, right? Thousands and thousands of slaves sweating in the desert sun, with overseers cracking whips over their backs. But here's the thing, that Hollywood version, it's just a story. It's a myth. The actual archaeological evidence that we've dug out of the sand at Giza tells a completely different story, one that's honestly way more complex and a whole lot more interesting. So how did we even figure this out? Well, this huge shift in our understanding didn't start with some grand planned excavation. It actually started with a total accident. An accident that began to unravel a 4,500-year-old mystery. It's one of my favorite stories in archaeology. Seriously, back in 1990, a tourist is just riding her horse near the Giza Plateau, and the horse suddenly stumbles. It tripped on a mud brick wall that was buried just under the sand. And just like that, by complete chance, she had stumbled upon the cemetery of the pyramid builders themselves. Now, this 1990 discovery was the real turning point, but it fit into a bigger puzzle. We knew about other workers' towns from earlier finds, but Giza was still a black box. This accident kicked off a whole new wave of excavations, and by 2010, there was no doubt. These tombs were from the exact time of the Great Pyramids, the 4th dynasty. And this is where a key player comes into the story, archaeologist Mark Lenner. After that cemetery was found, it was his team that really got in there and started the slow, painstaking work of piecing together the evidence of who these people were and what their lives were actually like. And here's the crucial part. That cemetery wasn't the only thing they found. It led them to something even bigger. Right there, next to where the builders were buried, Lenner and his team started to uncover the lost city where they had actually lived. And listen, this wasn't some makeshift labor camp. This was a highly organized, planned-out city. We're talking organized streets, houses, huge long barracks for workers who came in on rotation. They found massive bakeries and fish processing plants that were working on an industrial scale. All the signs pointed to a thriving community, not a prison camp. The forensic evidence from the cemetery really sealed the deal. When they examined the first 600 or so skeletons, they found that about half were female, and almost a quarter of them were children and even infants. That is the demographic profile of a town, of families. It's proof that a permanent community lived there, with their loved ones right in the shadow of the incredible monuments they were building. You know, artifacts like this piece of pottery, and they found thousands of them, they might not look like treasure you'd see in a museum, but in a way, they're so much better. This is real life. This is the bowl someone ate their dinner from, the cup they drank out of. It connects us directly to the people themselves. Which brings us to what might be the single most powerful piece of evidence against the whole slave theory: what these workers were eating. So let's take a look at the archaeology of their dinner plate. The amount of food they were producing was just mind-boggling. Thousands of loaves of bread every single day, huge facilities for processing fish. But the real shocker, the thing nobody expected, was the sheer number of animal bones, specifically cattle. And we're not talking about old, tough animals. The bone analysis shows they were eating prime beef, the best cuts from young cattle. In ancient Egypt, that was luxury food. And that really only leads to one conclusion. You do not feed a slave workforce prime beef. That kind of investment in your workers' well-being and their diet, it's just completely inconsistent with the idea of slavery. These were valued members of a massive project. Okay, so if they weren't slaves, then who were they? And how on earth did they get organized to pull off something this massive? Because this wasn't just a construction project, this was basically a national mobilization. First, let's get the numbers straight. The old story from the Greek historian Herodotus was that 100,000 slaves worked on the Great Pyramid. Well, he was wrong. Our modern estimates, based on the size of the city and all the logistics, put the number closer to maybe 20 to 25,000 people at any one time, made up of a core group of skilled permanent workers and a much larger group of temporary laborers who rotated in and out. And this massive workforce was brilliantly organized. From graffiti and inscriptions they left behind, we can see they used this really efficient system. The whole operation was broken down into smaller and smaller units. You had big crews, which were broken into gangs, then into smaller groups called files, and finally down to divisions of about 20 guys. It's how you take an impossible task and make it manageable. This is my absolute favorite detail. The graffiti tells us that these gangs had names, and they showed this incredible team spirit and camaraderie. You get a team calling themselves the Friends of Menkare, which sounds very noble, and then you get another team called the Drunkards of Menkare. That's not the mark of an oppressed slave. That's a sign of people who have a sense of identity and even a sense of humor about their tough job. So they're organized, they're well fed, but what about the actual engineering? I mean, how do you move a stone block that weighs 2.5 tons across the desert sand? For years, people were stumped until they took a closer look at this painting from a tomb. See that guy at the front of the sled? See how he's pouring something on the sand? That little detail was the key. Physicists actually tested this. And it turns out, if you pour just the right amount of water on sand, it becomes firm and cuts the friction in half. Suddenly, you need way fewer people to pull that massive block. It's such a simple, low-tech, but absolutely brilliant solution. It shows a deep, practical understanding of physics. So we figured out who the builders were and how they managed to do what they did. But the ultimate takeaway from all this new archaeology, the really big idea, forces us to totally reframe the whole question we started with. To really get why people would do this work, you have to understand an ancient Egyptian concept called bak. It was a kind of obligatory service, like a labor tax, that pretty much everyone owed to the state, from a farmer in his field to a high-ranking official. It wasn't slavery. It was seen as a civic duty, a contribution to a great national project that benefited everyone and honored the gods. And this brings us to this really profound idea from Mark Lenner. He said that eventually he became less interested in how the Egyptians built the pyramids and more interested in how the pyramids built Egypt. Think about that. This massive nationwide project is what forged the Egyptian state. It forced them to develop a bureaucracy, to manage logistics on a scale no one had ever seen, and it brought people together from all over the country. In a very real way, building the pyramids is what built Egypt itself. So we're left with this thought, right? Once we replace the old myth of slaves with the reality of skilled, organized, and respected citizens, the story changes completely. It's not a story about oppression anymore. It's a story about human ambition, about community, about unity. And it makes you wonder, what can this incredible 4,500-year-old project teach us today about what a society can achieve when it's united by a shared purpose? Something to think about. Class dismissed.